Hey, we're going to learn a little bit about World War II today and its impact on the United States and on the state of Washington. But before we get into the lesson, I want to go through a couple things about how it impacted people personally. Okay, this is a picture of my grandfather. That is my Grandpa Whipple. His name was Richard, and he was in the U.S. Navy. He was drafted, as I told you guys, in 1942 after the war started, and he served 2.5 years in the Navy, and his ship was actually sunk off the Philippines. Um, he was from a town called Wyanett, Illinois, and this little picture here actually shows some of Wyanett from a satellite view. I want to show you how impactful the draft was and how serious World War II was and how it impacted people. This was our house right here on the corner of 3rd and Walnut Street. I've got my cursor on it. My grandfather was drafted. His brother lived next door. He was drafted. The Genslingers lived across the street. 2 of their sons were drafted. The Youngs lived in this house. The father was drafted. The Spaiths lived in this house. They had 2 sons that were drafted. The Franklins lived in this house. They had 1 son that was drafted. The Travises lived down here on the corner, and the father was drafted. So every house but one had somebody fighting in World War II at that time. And Wyanett was only a town of about 900 people. There were over 100 people from Wyanett alone that fought in that war, including my grandpa and all of his brothers and my grandmother's brothers as well. Now, having been in the war, my grandfather's grave, which is in Wyanett, it's this one here on the left, it says Richard Whipple. He was a petty officer, 3rd class, and it notes that on his gravestone. If you look just in that part of the cemetery, all those flags are for people that served in the military. A lot of those people served in World War II. So World War II was a big, big deal. A lot of people fought in that war for our country. Of course, that was in Illinois, but that happened everywhere. So imagine on your street, that many people having to go fight in a war. It was a very serious war because a man named Adolf Hitler was the Nazi dictator in Germany. And basically, they did a lot of bad things. He believed Germans were a superior race. They rounded up all people who were Jewish, put them in concentration camps. By the end of the war, they killed 6 million Jewish people, right? In the meantime, Japan in 1941 bombed our naval station at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, and we entered the war. We entered the war on the side of the Allied powers, which would be Great Britain, France, the Soviet Union, which was Russia, and us. The Axis powers, also known as the Axis of Evil, was Germany, Italy, and Japan. That is who we fought against in that war. At the time of the war, our president was Franklin D. Roosevelt, FDR. You remember him from the Great Depression and the New Deal. He's the one that got us to enter the war after we were bombed at Pearl Harbor. Okay, and so during the war, as did the state during the Depression and the New Deal, Washington grew a lot. There was an economic boom because of the resources of manpower and things that we could build here. Okay, and the things that were built during the war, primarily in Washington, aluminum. Aluminum takes a lot of electricity, and we had hydroelectric dams, so it could be produced really cheaply. Ships, a lot of shipbuilding in the Seattle area, as there was during World War I, and Boeing airplanes. Another big thing that was built during the war was the atomic bomb. There was a project called the Manhattan Project, and it came out of the government deciding to secretly build an atomic weapon. All right, and so Hanford, down by Richland in the Tri-City, was selected as an area to produce plutonium. Plutonium is necessary to make atomic weapons. Hanford was chosen for this because it was close to the Columbia River, a lot of cold water. You need cold water to produce plutonium. It also got a lot of cheap power from Grand Coulee Dam, so they had lots of power. And it was kind of in a location where there weren't very many people at the time, and it could be kept secret. So the Hanford Nuclear Reservation produced the atomic bomb. So out of this state, we produced airplanes, produced ships, produced aluminum, and we produced the plutonium that went in atomic bombs. All right. So we'll get back to those bombs in a second. We were at war primarily against Germany and Japan, and because of this, a lot of Japanese Americans in the Western United States were relocated. There was a fear among some in power that they might be disloyal to the country and cause a problem. So they were forced to leave their homes and rounded up and put in relocation camps. And on that little map there in the text, it shows where those camps were at. A lot of those people lost their homes, lost their businesses while they were gone. After the war, they were allowed to go back to their homes, but it was not a good situation. They were not a fun place to be. They were kept under close guard with armed guards. There was barbed wire, and they were not allowed to leave. So they did not have the freedom they had before the war. After the war, they were gradually freed. And in 1988, they were actually awarded compensation for the troubles that the government had caused them. As the war went on, and I'm not going to get into the specifics of the war, this is more about the impact on Washington. Germany surrendered in May of 1945, but Japan did not surrender. Okay. And so Japan continued to fight on. And so we needed to find a way to end the war. All right. And the war, again, was the atomic bomb. So in August of 1945, jets from the United States Air Force dropped bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan, killed over 70,000 Japanese people, and forced Japan to surrender. After we dropped the first bomb, they didn't surrender, so we dropped a second one. So those bombs ended the war. So the bombs were a big deal that we produced the plutonium for. Obviously, the airplanes, the ships, and the aluminum, and our economy grew a great deal. Boeing alone employed over 50,000 people by the end of the war, and almost half of them were women. All right, so that's pretty much the gist of the lesson today. Get in there and read the text, and then finish the quiz, and that's it. If you have questions, please let me know.